How you doing, fellow coders, and welcome back to LARTech. In today's video, we will be continuing the Beginner's Python series with episode 2. We will be covering variables and operators, and we will also be partially covering the print statement. Let's get into the video. So let's start with variables. What are they? Well, you can think of a variable as a container that stores a piece of information. For example, you can make a variable called myname, and you can assign it the value LARTech. You can also make a variable called current year, and you can assign it the value 2021. Well, you may be asking, how do we make a variable? Well, let's go to Sublime Text to answer that question. So I'm just here in Sublime Text. I'm inside of my folder, which I made. It's called the Beginner's Python series. If you haven't made a folder for this series, I recommend you to do so it becomes more organized. I'm going to make a new script by pressing Ctrl N, and I'll save it with Ctrl S. And I'll call it variables and operators.py. And you want to make sure you save it in your folder. So I'm going to hit save, and now I have my script. So we can make a variable pretty easily. We can just make our variable by writing down its name and then pressing the equal sign, and then we assign its value. For example, let's make a variable called myname, and then we put an equal sign and we assign it the value LARTech. Don't worry about the quotation marks around LARTech for now. We will be covering what these do later on. These are called strings, and it's just a type of variable in Python. Don't worry about them right now, just know that we are storing LARTech in myname. Alright, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write print myname. Now it should be pretty obvious what's going to output here. Since we defined our variable called myname to be LARTech, printing myname should return LARTech. So I'm going to hit Ctrl B to test that out. And as you can see, we get LARTech. So that's working. So you can change this variable to be whatever you want. I'm going to change it to something like the Super Bowl, because that was like recently, right? So if I press Ctrl B again, we get Super Bowl. So you can change this to whatever you want, and this part is irrelevant. All that matters is what's inside this. Since it's a variable, we don't need to change anything else except for the value of the variable. So we can change it to anything. We can just like hit random keys, and it's going to output our random keys. We could say, hello, this is a test, and hit Ctrl B, and we get, hello, this is a test. We can change this to be a number, so we can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just going to press Ctrl Z, and I'm going to go back to Super Bowl. So it should be pretty intuitive now to see what we can do with variables. So far, we've just initialized our variable and printed it to the screen, but that's not really useful in most cases. It is useful in some cases. Sometimes you just want to print something, but a lot of the time you want to be making changes to your variables. You can make changes to your variables with operators. If you have an integer, like let's say 1, 2, 3, you can make changes to that integer to change the value. For example, we can make a change using plus equals 1 to make the value 124. We can change it to minus equals 1 to make it 122, and so on. Now I'm just going to comment all of this out using Control \, and as you can see, that comments it out. Basically, what commenting something out does is that it tells Python to completely ignore the commented out code. As you can see, it turns into a different color, and we have our hashtag, which indicates that we commented it out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable called num, and I'm going to set it to 1. And now I'm going to write print num, and we get 1. Now, as I said previously, this is useful in some cases, but a lot of the time we want to be making changes to our variables. Right now, it's going to print 1 no matter what we do. So I'm just going to keep running it, keep running it, keep running it. It's always going to be 1. It's never going to change. This is not ideal. So how do you change a variable, you ask? Well, there are many different ways. Just like in math, there are operators in Python which allow you to manipulate variables. In today's video, we will just be covering operators that can be performed on numbers, but there are also more operators that can be performed on different types of variables, and we will go over them in later videos. So let's say I want to increase num by 1. Let's say I don't want it to be 1 anymore. Let's say I wanted it to be 2. How can I increase num by 1? Well, it's pretty easy. I can just write num plus equals 1. Now, if this isn't obvious to you, what this is doing is just increasing num by 1. What this is saying is that num equals num plus 1. So we're changing the value of num. We're saying that the new value of num is the old value of num plus 1. These two lines of code are exactly the same, except this one is cleaner and it's shorter. So I'm just going to delete the second line of code. And I want you to make a prediction of what's going to happen. I'll give you a couple of seconds to pause the video. Got your answer? Well, I'm going to hit Control B to test it out. And we have 2. Should be pretty obvious. We're increasing num by 1, and if you increase 1 by 1, you get 2. So I'm going to comment this out using Control \, and I'm going to say num minus equals 1. Now, if num plus equals 1 makes num 2, what do you think num minus equals 1 will do? I'll give you a couple seconds to pause the video. Got your answer? Well, I'm going to press Control B to run our code, and we get 0. Should be pretty obvious again. 1 minus 1 is 0, and all we're doing here is we're subtracting 1 from num. So we're saying num equals num minus 1, but we're just shortening it. So I'm just going to delete this, and I'll comment this using Control \. Now, I'm going to say num asterisk, this is called an asterisk, this star, asterisk equals 2. Now, if you're not familiar, an asterisk in pretty much general computing means multiplication. What we're saying here is that num is equal to num times 2. And notice how I'm saying times when I'm putting my asterisk. So, if we're saying that our new num is equal to the old num times 2, what do you think our new num is going to be? I'll give you a couple of seconds again to pause the video and think of an answer. Got your answer? Well, Control B to run, and we get 2. So, the reason we get 2 is because we start num as 1, and we say that num is equal to num times 2. In this case, num is 1, so that means num is equals to 1 times 2. And 1 times 2 is simply 2. Again, I'm going to comment this using Control \, and I'm going to say num \ equals 2. Again, if you're not familiar with the \, in general computing it means division. So what we're saying here is that num is equal to num divided by 2. Let me just write that out. Num equals num divided by 2. We're making a new num, and we're saying that our new num is equal to our old num divided by 2. So if our old num is 1, and we're saying the new num is our old num divided by 2, then that means it's going to be 1 divided by 2. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to guess your answer. Got your answer? Well, Control B to run, and we get 0.5. The reason we get 0.5 is because we start num as 1, and we say that num is equal to the previous num, which is 1 divided by 2. 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, so this is why we get 0.5. Comment this out using Control \. And now I'm going to cover some more obscure operators. The ones I'll be covering in this video are the Modulo Operator, the Exponentiation Operator, and the Floor Division Operator. So let's start with the Modulo Operator. The Modulo Operator may sound a little bit weird at first because it has a weird name, like what does modulo even mean? It may be confusing at first, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes really intuitive. The modulo operator just returns the remainder after division. So that may sound weird, but here's how it works. So if I wanted to divide a number like 5 by a number like 3, you wouldn't get a whole number, right? You would get a decimal, which can also be expressed as a whole number with a remainder. So the remainder of 5 divided by 3 would be 2, because 3 can go into 5 one time with 2 being left over. Therefore, 5 modulo 3 would be 2. So let's go back to our code and let's write num percentage equals 1. Now, percentage is just the modulo sign, as I showed before, and we're using equal, which is a pattern, as you can see. So if modulo returns the remainder after division, what do you think the remainder after division will be if we divide by 1? I'll give you a couple seconds to take your guess. Got your answer? Well, let's press Ctrl B to test it. And we get 0. The reason we get 0 is because 1 can go into 1 cleanly. It does not have to have a remainder. Since it does not need a remainder, we just return 0. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to comment this out with Ctrl backslash. And I'm going to write num asterisk equals 3. Now what this does is this is exponentiation, as we talked about before. If you remember from school, exponentiation is just multiplying a number by itself a given number of times. For example, if we had 2 and we raised it to the third power, we would get 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. Right now, we're raising num to the third power, so we will get 1 times 1 times 1. Knowing that, make a guess, and I'll give you a couple of seconds. Got your answer? Well, let's test it with Ctrl B. And we get 1. This should be pretty obvious because 1 raised to this third power, as I said, is 1 times 1 times 1, and 1 times 1 times 1 is simply 1. So this is the last one. This one is called the floor division operator, and it is not dissimilar to the modulo operator. The floor division operator performs division, but it rounds down. For example, 5 floor division 2, and floor division is just represented by 2 backslashes, so 5 floor division 2 would be 2, because 2 can go into 5 2.5 times, but the floor division operator rounds down to 2. That's why 5 floor division 2 is 2. This is also the case with 10 floor division 3. Since 3 can't go into 10 cleanly, the floor division operator will round down. Since we're rounding down, 10 floor division 3 becomes 3. So I'm going to go back to my code and I'm going to press Ctrl backslash to comment this line out. And I'm going to say num backslash equals 2. I will also change num to be 7 because using num as 1 for this case isn't a good example. So remembering what you know about floor division and how it rounds down, try to predict what will happen if we floor divide 7 by 2. I'll give you a couple of seconds to take your guess. Got your answer? Well, let's press Ctrl B and test it out. And we get 3. Now this should be pretty obvious because 2 can't go into 7 cleanly. It can only go cleanly 3 times, which becomes 6. So we round down to 3. So I'm just going to comment this out, and I'm going to hit Ctrl S to save. And that is going to be it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something, because that's the goal of this channel. I also hope you're interested in tech, because we will be covering a lot of tech on this channel. If you liked the video, like it. If you didn't, dislike it. And if you didn't, make sure to comment what you didn't like so I can improve. If you really liked it, make sure to subscribe because you will be seeing a lot of content like this in the future. This has been LarTech, signing out.